The point you are making, Matilda, is actually being, or rather the question you are asking, is being hammered out on the anvil right now in India. Because from what I said, you could see that a word which had this broad territorial connotation was then reduced to having a religious connotation and was then reduced to having one religion connotation. In some sense, you might say it had been suffering semantic shrinkage from the point of view of some onlookers. And this process has been a post-independent India process, about 70 years in the making. Now we have a political party in India which would describe the scene as I have. There is a shrinkage. And they want to, in a sense, restore its original meaning. By first insisting that Hinduism is not restricted to Hinduism within quotes, includes all the religions of Indian origin. And then is insisting that all the followers of the religions of India, which are not of Indian origin, specifically Islam and Christianity, were at one time Hindus. And therefore, we are justified is using this term in this broad sense of covering all Indians, irrespective of their religion, because we are culturally one. If you insist that they are religiously distinct, then their counter-argument is we are culturally one. And that is why we want this to restore, and in a sense to give it this new semantic range of representing Hindu culture. Neither a purely geographical connotation, nor a purely religious connotation, but a cultural connotation. And so every Indian can be Hindu by culture, not by religion.
But what happens to those people who are in a tradition where they think is for them distinct from
That distinction is not being challenged.
Right.
What is being challenged is the perception that by changing the religion, they change their culture. And especially that their culture became an alien culture. We will look to Arabia and Persia when you became a Muslim. When you became a Christian, we will look to the West. The new dispensation is questioning this. Why do you do that? Why is India not a holy place for you as much as for us? Yeah? And always pointing out that your ancestors were Hindus. Do you deny that? Do you deny that genetically all Indians are the same or related? So we are all genetic Hindus. Previously, all of us were at one time Hindus. So there's various ways this argument works. But you can see where it's coming from. Now to go to where the problem arose. Why we find ourselves in this situation. This has to do with the use of Western concepts to describe Indian reality, certainly at one level. When the British introduced, before I say that, I have to say that most scholars are now agreed that the pre-British religious identity in India was diverse and fluid, even in the context of Islam and Christianity. Maybe not to the same extent, but it partook in this general Indian ethos. This is very important for the next point. So when British started taking the censuses around 1880, around that time, they gradually started emphasizing exclusive religious identity. In the census, you could only give one religion as the one to which you belonged. Now, this had the effect in the eyes of those Indians who were committed to this Indic, you might say, right? To this comprehensive Indic tradition, embracing what we now call Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, all of it. That this move is fragmenting that ecumenical tradition. Right? How do we deal with this situation? How do we face this fact now? How do we preserve its unity and integrity of the Indic religious tradition? Islam and Christianity openly of foreign origin, right? How do we preserve the integrity of all the religions of Indian origin, which you might call Indic religious tradition? How do we preserve its tolerance, its permeability, and so on? So, the Hindu thinker by the name of Savarkar, in 1925, wrote a 23 maybe, around that time, wrote a slender book entitled Who is a Hindu? And then he coined the term Hindutva in that book. Not Hinduism, not India, not Hinduism, but Hindutva. And he argued that there may be these four religious traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. And you may be able to distinguish between them as religions. But there is something they share as culture, though different as religions. That what they share is Hindutva. I see in this whole maneuver the effect to overcome the disruptive effect of introducing one Western term, a religion, by using another Western term, culture, to undo the effect of the first. Because even the distinction between religion and culture is not there in Hinduism in the way it works in the West.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting, but because, even like thinking about these traditions, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, thinking about, for instance, Ashwagosha's The Life of the Buddha. Yeah, and how it's the tradition. The Buddhist tradition is making a point to separate from the Hindu. there in that work, or that's my reading of it. Or I feel like I could point out some places where that's happening. How does that address or fit in here? Not that the tradition, of Buddhism was itself sort of separated.
It fits in very well because it tells us how intangible yet powerful this process is. When even scholars are doing it, and probably unconsciously, writing things in a way which emphasizes the separation between these traditions, that separate entity, separate identity, rather than and obscuring what is common to them. See, what Savarkar tried to do was to show that they may be different as religions, but they share the same culture. So when you look at these traditions, as you have, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, you are struck by both the facts that they are distinct, but also that they have a lot in common. So now the effort of the Indian thinkers is, especially Hindu thinkers, is how do we retrieve, save, and if possible retrieve this common ground which is being rapidly eroded by this invisible attack of Western conceptual invasion, which has been going on for 200 years and which continues unabated under the present education system and the political system. And that is getting progressively eroded. And the first effort was by Savarkar to claim that they may be different by religion, but they have a common culture, and he used the word Hindutva to embody that element, common element. What is that common element? That all of them regard India as the land, as their holy land, and as their ancestral land. And then he could distinguish this from Muslims and Christians who may regard India as their ancestral land, but do not regard it as their holy land. So this is how the division was set up. There are religions of foreign origin in India. There are religions of Indian origin. Religions of Indian origin have a certain commonness, which is now being destroyed, or reduced, or attenuated, or eroded. And so how are we to save the situation? So we have a common culture, and that is Hindutva. So the battle is still on. The only thing that has happened now is that over the past 3 or 4 years, the balance of political power has shifted slightly in favor of those who view the situation negatively. That these developments of 200 years, which have been attenuating, according to them, this common ground, rapidly eroding, how to save it and to retrieve it. So the people who held this view are now in political power. And those whose view prevailed and were highly influential so far are the people who have just lost out in the electoral battle. They are committed to their point of view. I don't want this to be just good guy, bad guy, the westernized Indians and Western scholars and Indians who have been in the West are the bad guys, and these are the good guys. It's a subtler issue. It's a very fundamental civilizational issue. And unless we look at it that way, we'll always be looking at this bad, good, bad, we'll be involved in advocacy and not analysis. See, from the point of view of the West, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, even though they believe in the same God, and hold the same ancestor Abraham in veneration are three separate religions. So for them, this is a natural development. There is no big deal in this. That there might be many similarities between these four religions of Indian origin. No. They have to be separated out. There is a further point that the Indian crowd, the Hindus, are mixed up, sentimental. You have to be rational. Sort these things out in clear boxes. As a result of which, even the archaeology carried out in Southeast Asia was influenced by these ideas. If I take the name Angkor Wat to you now, with which religion would you identify it? Angkor Wat in Cambodia.
I don't know. What?
They might describe it as Hindu.
Oh, yeah, okay. In Cambodia.
Yeah, it's Hindu. And if I took the name of Borobudur in Indonesia, it would be identified as Buddhist. Now, I do not know much about Borobudur, but I know about Angkor Wat, that there was a functioning Buddhist monastic order right there, which was sent packing. Because the archaeologists thought that this is a Hindu site. Instead of seeing in that a replication of what is going on in India, Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs living side by side, sharing sacred spaces, right? Instead of seeing an extension of that life in Cambodia, they say they are all muddled up. They don't know what they are doing. We will rationalize it. This is Hindu. This is Buddhist. So even your datum, even your data has been contaminated by the Western perspective. Because you will go to these sites for the evidence. They've already sent them packing.
But is there a inconsistency when, when the desire is to be inclusive of all of the Indian origin religions?
At least those.
But what about, people who, I understand that Muslims and Christians
want to be separate.
That their holy land is not in India, or that's the distinction. But it seems like, I don't know. I think.
So, what are the aspirations of these people to be different?
No, not so much that, but because I also think that, or I don't. I mean, my understanding would be that a Jain follower of Jainism would want to be distinct as well from. I think the word Hindu. I mean, I don't know.
No. You're quite right.
Really,
there is also a struggle for the word going on. Yeah.
Right.
We need to have a common. Is there a common word for all the four religions? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And is it there? What is it? What can it be? Yeah. Now, the fact that the religions of Indian origin are distinct does not mean that they are separate.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it all was boiled down to. Is what is distinct separate? We have these four fingers and a thumb, it's part of the palm. They are distinct. Are they separate? Or part of one? Hinduism has this basic thrust of respect of pluralism and willingness to accept others. so long as they don't themselves challenge that pluralism. Otherwise, the system won't last. They can actually challenge that pluralism, so long as they do not effectively challenge that pluralism. Like the democracy.
Mm-hmm.
You can say Canada should break up in 4 provinces or whatever, right? Separate countries and all that. Fine. Till force is used to bring that kind of thing about, right? There is a point at which, if you allow those forces to keep functioning within your framework will be destroyed. The best example is the Marxists, who openly say we want dictatorship. You can allow them to function as a party. But can you allow them to come in power? Then your whole democratic setup goes. They've openly said they will make it dictatorship. So you have that kind of a problem here.
Mm-hmm.
That is the kind of problem you have with Christianity and Islam in India.
Mm-hmm.
That is why Hindus say it's only in a Hindu majority country, India, that you will have secularism. So it's a very complex issue, as you can see, but I'm giving you the various arguments and the perspectives which are being played out in this situation, and how historically the situation has come to this juncture. Now, what can we call all the 4 religions together? All the 4 religions except the word dharma as integral to them. So it could be called the dharmic tradition, all 4 together. All the 4 insist on liberation as moksha. They can be called moksha dharma, which has the benefit of getting both the words in. The word is actually used in the Mahabharata, though in a slightly different sense. So these are the kind of creative maneuvers which have to take place now. If what the new dispensation is trying to retrieve, to protect, save and retrieve and recover even, has to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And there is self-righteousness on both sides. You can see how typical Western, although it appears gravely flawed from the other side, would regard itself as totally kosher. And you can also see how the Hindu position, quote unquote, regarded as suspect by this side, is quite cogent on its own turf.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be it's quite a major cultural war, actually, going on.
Cultural war, you say, yeah.
At least cultural struggle.
Yeah.
War is too strong.